the ecstatic sage, the life and visions of Sri Ramakrishna. In the remote village of Kamarpukur, nestled amidst the lush fields and meandering paths of rural Bengal, a child was born who would one day become a saint, a mystery, and a luminous teacher for countless seekers of the divine. He was born on February 18, 1836, by many accounts, though exact dates vary, into the simple household of Kshudiram Chattopadhyay and Chandra Devi. They named him Gadadhar, a reference to the mace-bearing Vishnu, though no one in that humble community could have anticipated the profound significance of this child's life and the spiritual legacy he would leave behind. This is the story of Sri Ramakrishna, a life so full of visions, revelations, ecstatic devotion, and childlike simplicity that it continues to inspire both devotees and curious observers across the globe. From the very beginning, Gadadhar's life was marked by an unusual spiritual temperament. Family members and villagers alike noticed in him a certain intensity of spirit and a ready ease in devotional practices. As a baby, he was said to have quieted and grown calm whenever spiritual songs were sung or when the name of God was uttered near him. His mother, Chandra Devi, would recall how he would suddenly stop crying and break into a rapt, almost rapturous silence when the local kirtan singers passed by the narrow lanes, chanting the name of Hari. The villagers saw in him not just a child but something akin to a young sage, though no one then dared to utter such a grandiose term out loud. He was merely little Gadadhar, a village boy, albeit one with a strong spiritual inclination. At the time of his birth, the family was not well-to-do, but it was known in the region that the Chattopadhyayas had once possessed a relatively comfortable status. Kshudiram, devout and gentle, maintained the family's dignity despite straitened circumstances. Their ancestral deity was Raghuvir, a form of Lord Rama, and the family's devotion was wholeheartedly directed toward this cherished household deity. "Raghuvir will guide us," Kshudiram often said, lifting his eyes skyward whenever adversity struck. From Gadadhar's earliest days, his father's faith infused the household with a sense of awe and reverence for all things divine. Even as a toddler, Gadadhar would gaze intently at the images of gods and goddesses, sometimes murmuring as though conversing with them directly. Though the family had limited means, their hearts were open, and their small home in Kamarpukur was a place of warmth and piety. Gadadhar was the apple of everyone's eye. His playfulness, affectionate nature, and quick wit won him friends of all ages. Even so, lurking behind his bright eyes was a deep yearning for something beyond the playful amusements that typically occupied a village child. Where other children reveled in games of tag or chasing dragonflies, Gadadhar found joy in the recitation of holy stories, or simply in gazing at a clear sky until he was swept into an internal state of wonder. There is a tale often recounted about Gadadhar's early childhood, and it takes place in a rice paddy field near Kamarpukur. One day, as he and some young friends trudged out into the fields to collect fodder for the cattle, Gadadhar found himself overwhelmed by an intense and inexplicable experience. The sky had been bright and clear for most of the afternoon, but suddenly, dense dark clouds rolled in from the horizon. The monsoon season in Bengal has a way of transforming a bright day into a moment of looming darkness, and so it was that day. Thunder echoed in the distance, lightning flashed across the sky, and then a torrential downpour ensued. Instead of running for cover, Gadadhar reportedly stood transfixed by the sight, his attention captured by the interplay of light and shadow, the drama of the thunder, and the startling brilliance of the lightning. Overcome by a sense of the infinite and by an unspeakable beauty, Gadadhar collapsed to the ground in a deep swoon. His friends, unsure what to do, hurried to get help. When they returned with some adults from the village, Gadadhar was found lying in the wet field, his face bearing an otherworldly bliss. His body shook with sobs of joy rather than fear or distress. Some in the village whispered that it was a sign of divine favor. Others, more skeptical, worried that perhaps the boy was prone to sudden fainting or some kind of mental spell. When pressed later on what he had felt in that moment, Gadadhar could only say, "I saw a luminous form, something ineffable, and my heart pounded with indescribable sweetness. I lost all awareness of this world." There are, of course, more secular or psychological explanations for such an event. A physiological reaction to the sudden shock of thunder combined with a hypersensitive nervous system, could have produced a faint. Some might wonder if he suffered from epilepsy or a similar condition that triggered altered states of consciousness. However, for those around him at the time, especially within the deeply spiritual environment of rural Bengal, the occurrence was interpreted as a mystical experience, a momentary lifting of the veil between the mortal realm and the divine. That notion would only be reinforced by the many visions he would have in the years to come. Gadadhar's father passed away when the boy was still quite young, which left the family in a precarious position. Yet even after Kshudiram's death, the father's unwavering devotion to God lived on in Gadadhar's heart. The boy continued to attend the local school, but he had little interest in the classical subjects of grammar, mathematics, or the other standard teachings of the day. He excelled, however, in singing and in narrating sacred stories, often enthralling those around him with his uncanny ability to get lost in these tales, transforming them into living experiences. "Why should one fuss about breadwinning education?" he would sometimes remark in later recollections. "I would rather learn about that which educates the heart, the lives of gods and saints. Isn't that the true purpose of study?" As Gadadhar entered his teens, the families in the region began to notice his distinctive demeanor. While many young boys tried to exert themselves physically, show braggadocio, or cultivate more worldly accomplishments, Gadadhar maintained a kind of gentle simplicity. He was not timid, far from it, but he had little interest in the ambitions that typically fired the imagination of others his age. Whenever folk singers or sadhus, wandering monks, visited Kamarpukur, Gadadhar took every chance to spend time in their company, eagerly devouring their stories and songs. He discovered a singular delight in hearing about divine incarnations, Rama, Krishna, Chaitanya, and the many forms of the goddess. And sometimes, to everyone's amazement, he would slip into what the villagers began to call his moods, periods of deep absorption, almost trance-like, wherein tears often ran down his cheeks, and he appeared as though transported to another plane of being. One day, a traveling group of actors came through Kamarpukur, staging a dramatic performance of the story of Rama. Gadadhar watched, enthralled, as the scenes of the Ramayana unfolded. When the actor playing Hanuman entered, leaping about in fealty to Lord Rama, tears streamed down Gadadhar's face, and he appeared to be praying even as the drama continued. In the scenes where Rama was exiled to the forest, Gadadhar cried so loudly that he disrupted the performance. Many in the audience were both moved and bemused by this boy who seemed to experience the epic events as though they were unfolding in real time before his eyes. Some villagers teased him, thinking him overly sensitive. Others, especially the older folks, silently bowed their heads, suspecting that Gadadhar's tears were born of genuine devotion, a heart that felt no separation between the divine narrative and ordinary reality. When his elder brother, Ramkumar, established himself as a priest in Calcutta, then spelt Kalikata in many documents and widely referred to simply as Calcutta in English parlance, he called Gadadhar to join him. Their family's financial situation was dire, and Ramkumar hoped to have Gadadhar trained so he could assist in priestly duties. Gadadhar, ever agreeable, left Kamarpukur for the bustling city, though reluctantly. The city's chaotic energy, the noise, the clamour of commerce, and the swirl of so many people overwhelmed and repulsed him at first. When he arrived in the city, wearing simple village garments, he felt out of place amid the dusty throngs of labourers, carriage drivers, British officers, merchants and scholars. Yet the call of destiny had placed him there, for in time he would become the head priest of the famed Dakshineswar Kali Temple, an opportunity that would shape his life and legacy. Calcutta was under substantial British influence. The East India Company had been entrenched in Bengal for generations, and modern Western ideas were filtering into the social and intellectual fabric of the city. There were new social reform movements, printing presses, English education, and a segment of society deeply influenced by rationalist currents and Christian missionaries. But there was also a part of Calcutta that remained steeped in the old ways, devout Hindus who continued with fervent rituals, old temple worship, and the endless chanting of God's names in the streets. It was into this matrix of tradition and modernity that Gadadhar stepped. Ramkumar's friend introduced Gadadhar to the newly built temple complex of Dakshineswar, located on the eastern bank of the Hooghly River, just north of Calcutta. The complex had been founded by Rani Rashmoni, a wealthy woman of the Mahishya caste, who despite her lower social rank by Brahminical standards, was a philanthropist and devout worshipper of the Divine Mother. Construction of the temple had been completed around 1855, and it boasted a grand temple dedicated to the goddess Kali, flanked by other shrines dedicated to Shiva, Radha Krishna, and several smaller deities. When Gadadhar first arrived at Dakshineswar, he was overwhelmed by the imposing structure, the sweeping courtyard, the endless row of 12 Shiva temples in alignment, and above all, by the presiding image of Kali, Bhavatarini, the savior of the universe. Carved from black stone, decorated with gold ornaments, and dressed in shimmering cloth, the goddess Kali's image exuded a fierce and loving presence at once. The temple's reflection glittered on the surface of the Hooghly, merging with the daily life of ferries, fishermen, and worshippers coming by boat for darshan, holy site, of the Divine Mother. It was initially Ramkumar who served as a priest, or sometimes performed ritual duties there, but soon Gadadhar's devotion and sincerity became the focus of notice. The young man poured his heart and soul into every ritual offering, every chant, every song he sang before the Mother. Rani Rashmoni and her son-in-law Mathur Babu were impressed by his ardor and authenticity, and so Gadadhar, still known by that name at this point, was appointed as the main priest of the Kali temple. It is said that when Gadadhar first garlanded the Mother's image, the sincerity of his devotion brought tears to the eyes of those who witnessed it. Some accounts say that as he placed the flower garland around Kali's neck, he trembled with emotion, and in that instant, he felt that the stone image had come alive. He was inundated by ecstasy, losing external consciousness, remaining speechless and trembling for long moments. The practical-minded observers questioned this behavior. Was this new priest prone to fainting spells? Could he be epileptic, or was it simply a manipulation to draw the attention of wealthy patrons? Many theories abounded. Yet to those closest to him, including Mathur Babu, there was no pretense in Gadadhar's tears. His entire being had become immersed in what he would later describe as the ocean of the Mother's love. As time went on, Gadadhar, gradually known as Ramakrishna, for it was customary for a priest or spiritual teacher to adopt a name that reflected a divine attribute, and Ramakrishna seemed appropriate as a combination of two avatars, dedicated himself night and day to the worship of Kali. His manner of worship was startlingly unconventional. He often sang devotional songs in front of the deity in a state of rapture. He would talk to the image as though speaking to a person. "Mother," he would say in the stillness of the night, "are you just a stone figure, or are you truly here? Why won't you speak to me? Show me your face, Mother. I cannot live another day without seeing you." He would sob like a child who had lost its mother, rolling on the ground in a longing that both captivated and frightened onlookers. It was as if the goddess were his nearest and dearest relation, rather than a deity to be worshipped from a respectful distance. In the official temple procedures there was a set order. One must ring the bell at certain times, offer flowers and food in particular sequences, recite or chant in a prescribed manner. But Ramakrishna frequently broke these formalities, throwing himself at the feet of the Mother and weeping or dancing with the symbols in wild abandon. Some Orthodox priests disapproved, declaring him unfit and demanding that he be removed from the position. And yet Rani Rashmoni's family, particularly her son-in-law Mathur Babu, was moved by Ramakrishna's devotion and insisted that he remain. If the Mother herself was pleased, they reasoned, who were they to doubt? Ramakrishna's state of longing for Kali intensified over time. During the worship, if he did not feel the direct presence of the Mother, he would become utterly distraught. "Mother," he would cry, "you showed yourself yesterday, why not today? Have I offended you?" The extremes of emotional intensity often left him physically exhausted, yet also strangely invigorated by a divine energy. At times he reported seeing Kali walking through the temple at night, her form blazing in ethereal light. Other times, he described how the statue itself would appear to move, beckoning him closer, or how he saw luminous rays emanating from the goddess's forehead. Whether one interprets these visions as genuine mystical experiences or as manifestations of his psychological or neurological makeup, it is clear that they transformed his entire being. He became, as many described, a man intoxicated with God. Word of this extraordinary priest spread beyond Dakshineswar. Some came out of curiosity, some to laugh at what they perceived as his theatrics, some to test him, and some simply to behold this unusual man. Among the earliest visitors was a Brahmani named Bhairavi, a woman ascetic deeply versed in tantric scriptures. She recognized in Ramakrishna not an insane priest, but rather a rare soul undergoing intense spiritual experiences. Bhairavi Brahmani, as she was called, offered him guidance in certain tantric disciplines, seeing that he was already spontaneously performing many of the inner devotional practices that typically require years of initiation. She declared in front of a circle of skeptical priests that Ramakrishna had attained genuine states of samadhi and that these states were in alignment with the ancient scriptural accounts of divine ecstasy. When asked how she could be so sure, she is said to have replied, "I see in him all the signs of a Mahabhava, an intense spiritual emotion that the greatest devotees of Kali have demonstrated throughout history." Despite this endorsement, controversy swirled. A few orthodoxy-minded priests wanted to remove him, but each time the storms of doubt raged, either Matha Babu or Rani Rashmoni herself stood by Ramakrishna. Eventually, though, his daily trances, visions, and emotional fluctuations took a toll on his body and mind, and many wondered if a break from temple duties would help him regain his balance. During this period, Ramakrishna often repeated, "I have not come to become a worldly priest. I am here only to see Mother. Everything else is of no concern." Indeed, if he lost consciousness of the world while singing the Mother's praises, he sometimes remained in that state for hours. Such happenings seemed less like the act of a mere temple priest and more like the luminous expressions of a saint in the making. Ramakrishna began to explore various ways in which people love and approach God. He had devoted himself to the worship of Kali as the Divine Mother. But now, under the gentle guidance of Bhairavi Brahmani, he also practiced Vaishnava disciplines, meditating on the forms of Radha and Krishna, repeating their names with fervor, and singing Vaishnava songs of longing. On one occasion, he dressed himself in female attire, adopting the mood of Radha pining for Krishna, which evoked intense devotion within him. Another time he spent hours chanting the name of Rama, tears wetting his cheeks. Each experiment seemed to culminate in a direct experience. He felt the presence of the deity, or he witnessed a mystical vision that left him speechless. These visions were not merely ephemeral. Sometimes they contained instructions or deeper revelations that would shift Ramakrishna's perspective. For instance, he recounted a vision in which he saw the goddess Kali transform into a vast luminosity that filled the entire temple and then condense back into herself. To him, this signified that Mother is everything and everything is Mother. She alone is real. All else is a play of her light and shadow. At other times, he perceived forms of other deities within the same luminous being, suggesting that all gods and goddesses were but aspects of the same ultimate reality. In these experiences, we see the seeds of Ramakrishna's later teaching that all religious paths ultimately converge at the same divine source. However, not everyone accepted these accounts uncritically. Even some devoted Hindus questioned whether these experiences were illusions of the mind. In modern psychological terms, one might suggest that Ramakrishna's deep emotional fervor, combined with powerful autosuggestion, brought about visionary episodes akin to self-induced hypnosis or an epileptic aura. Scholars even in later years debated whether certain forms of temporal lobe epilepsy could account for his trance states. Yet for Ramakrishna himself, and for the many spiritual adepts who encountered him, these visions bore the imprint of authentic spiritual contact. His mother, Chandra Devi, and some relatives grew concerned that perhaps what he needed was the grounding of a household life. They reasoned that if he were married, he might become more anchored in the world and less lost in these waves of ecstasy. Ramakrishna himself did not oppose the plan. He did not see marriage as an impediment if it was the will of the Divine Mother. Thus, at the age of around 23, he was formally betrothed to a young girl named Saradamani, later to be known as Sarada Devi, who was only about 5 at the time of engagement, not an uncommon age in 19th century Bengal for marriage alliances, though cohabitation would come much later. Ramakrishna did not even attend the wedding ceremony in person. His relatives managed it on his behalf, as was sometimes done in rural traditions for child brides. Some accounts say he did visit, if briefly, but was so absorbed in his own spiritual moods that he performed the ceremony mechanically. It would be several years before Sarada Devi joined him at Dakshineswar. By then she was in her late teens, and had heard countless rumors about her husband's eccentricities, his supposed madness, his divine trances, and his role as the temple priest. She came with a mixture of curiosity and concern. When she finally saw him, she found not a madman, but a gentle childlike soul who welcomed her with open arms, saying, "It is the mother who has brought you here. Will you serve her with me?" To her relief and perhaps surprise, Ramakrishna made no demands of worldly married life. Instead, he viewed her as the living embodiment of the Divine Mother herself. Their relationship was one of deep spiritual companionship rather than conventional matrimony. In later years, she would be revered as the Holy Mother, or Sri Sarada Devi, a spiritual teacher in her own right. Ramakrishna's spiritual experiments continued unabated. One of the pivotal chapters in his life occurred when a wandering ascetic, known as Totapuri, visited Dakshineswar. Totapuri was an Advaita Vedantin, a monk dedicated to the realization of the formless absolute, or Brahman, which transcends all names and forms. Totapuri saw in Ramakrishna a soul ripe for the highest Advaitic realization. Sensing his potential, Totapuri asked whether he would like to learn the path of nirvikalpa samadhi, a state in which the mind dissolves entirely in the oneness of the Absolute. Ramakrishna, always open to any practice that might reveal a deeper truth of the Divine Mother, consented. Totapuri initiated him with a sacred mantra and instructed him to focus on the formless Brahman, setting aside all forms and images, including that of Kali. But every time Ramakrishna tried to rise to that state, he found that the luminous image of Mother Kali would appear in his mind's eye. He could not move beyond it. Finally, Totapuri took a small piece of glass and pressed it between Ramakrishna's eyebrows, saying sternly, "Cut through the form with the sword of knowledge." At that very moment, Ramakrishna later said, he summoned all his will and concentration, envisioning a sword cutting through the form of the mother that he so loved. In a flash, he found himself plunged into what he later described as the indefinable ocean of formless consciousness. He remained in that samadhi for hours, some say days, completely unaware of the external world. Totapuri, stunned, recognized that what had taken him decades of austere practice to achieve, Ramakrishna had attained in a single attempt. "This is unheard of," Totapuri reportedly said. "He is not an ordinary soul." Yet after several days in continuous samadhi, Ramakrishna was brought back to normal awareness by the calls of the temple staff and Mathur Babu, concerned for his well-being. Totapuri tested Ramakrishna further, instructing him to remain in that formless state for extended periods. At one point, Totapuri himself encountered an unexpected malady, a severe dysentery that caused him agony. Searching for relief, he was perplexed because as an advanced monk, he had always considered the body a mere illusion. But the pain was unbearable. During the turmoil, Totapuri had a realization or vision of the Divine Mother, something he had never contemplated before in his strict path of non-dual formlessness. He discovered a sweet presence and protection in the Mother, an insight that came, he believed, through Ramakrishna's influence. And so Totapuri left Dakshineswar with a new respect for the harmony of form and formlessness. Ramakrishna, having touched the highest non-dual state, did not renounce his devotion to Kali. Instead, he found a new unity in which both the personal God with form and the impersonal Brahman, formless, were aspects of the same reality. "Mother herself is the Brahman I experienced," he would say with a smile, bridging what many consider irreconcilable theological stances, personal theism and absolute non-dualism. This emphasis on the harmony of different spiritual paths soon became a hallmark of his teachings. He did not stop there. In subsequent months and years, he explored paths from various religions, delving into the practices of Islam under the guidance of an experienced Sufi practitioner, though the exact identity of that teacher remains uncertain in historical records. He would dress as a Muslim, pray to Allah with sincerity, and as with everything else, he claimed to have a direct vision of a luminous figure identified with the Prophet. After that vision, he concluded that the essence of Islam was not separate from what he had already experienced in Hinduism. "I found that the same God resides in all hearts," he said. He also practiced Christian devotion, reportedly focusing on an image of the Madonna and child that had been given to him. He would read or listen to the Bible's teachings, recite the name of Jesus, and soon had a vision of a radiant Christ who merged into his being. "I saw a white figure advancing towards me," he later recounted, "and then the mother showed me that it was none other than the same light, the same ocean of consciousness, but in the form of Jesus." These interreligious experiments, almost unique for a 19th-century Hindu priest, were not studied academically. Rather, they were undertaken out of an insatiable spiritual curiosity. Ramakrishna wanted to taste the divine in every form, convinced that all paths led to the same ultimate truth. Later, when asked about his unorthodox, even radical approach of practicing multiple faiths, he would laugh and say, "I have dined in Mother's pantry. She has cooked every dish, and each is equally delicious." As these experiences accumulated, Dakshineswar began to attract a new wave of visitors, not only from religious or rural backgrounds but also from the rising urban intellectual circles. Many young people of Calcutta were part of the Brahmo Samaj movement, a theistic reform movement that advocated a more rational, monotheistic form of Hinduism. They were drawn to Ramakrishna's teachings on the unity of all paths and intrigued by his ecstatic devotion. The most influential among them was perhaps Keshab Chandra Sen, a prominent leader in the Brahmo Samaj, who brought large groups to meet Ramakrishna, hoping to glean spiritual inspiration. Keshab was at first astonished by Ramakrishna's childlike simplicity. He found Ramakrishna's illiteracy and disregard for formal scholarship puzzling, yet he could not deny the man's radiant presence and deep wisdom. Keshab once asked, "How can you harmonize so many different faiths? Are they not contradictory?" Ramakrishna responded, "Many ponds are dug to reach water. The water in each pond is the same, though people may call it by different names. Go deeper, you will find the same essence." Dialogue like this, combined with Ramakrishna's direct experiences of multiple religious paths, deeply impressed Keshab. Word began to spread among intellectual circles that there was a saint in Dakshineswar whose knowledge was not of the learned type, but of the kind gleaned from first-hand experience of the divine. Yet not all were convinced. Some rational thinkers argued that Ramakrishna's visions were illusions, that he was ignorant of Western science, that his talk of seeing Kali or Christ indicated superstition. Ramakrishna was unperturbed by such criticism. He often told visitors, "What the mother shows me, I see. If you wish to believe, believe. If you do not, it does not matter. God does not belong to me or to one religion only. She, he, it belongs to all." When challenged about the efficacy of reason versus faith, he would say, "Reason is good, but reason that stands in the way of the mother you love is worthless. Go forward and see for yourself." Among the many who came to listen to Ramakrishna was a young schoolteacher named Mahendranath Gupta, eventually referred to simply as M. Over time, M began taking copious notes of his conversations with Ramakrishna, as well as the many episodes of spiritual insight he witnessed at Dakshineswar. These journals would later form the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the most comprehensive record of Ramakrishna's teachings and everyday conversations. Through M's meticulous detail, we see Ramakrishna's spontaneity, humor, love, and occasional sternness. We see how he used parables and analogies drawn from everyday Bengali life, gardening, fishing, cooking, to illustrate profound truths. One day, while Emsha quietly sat in Ramakrishna's room, he heard the saint say, "There is but one ocean of consciousness. All these forms are waves, yet ignorant men see the wave as separate from the ocean. Mother has shown me again and again, it is one. But as long as there is a I and a you, the wave remains. One day, the wave merges." Ramakrishna's voice, high and sweet, captivated the young teacher, who later wrote, "In that small room, as Sri Ramakrishna spoke, it was as though I had stepped into another world. I felt a spiritual current pervading the atmosphere." Others who would become key figures in Ramakrishna's legacy also gravitated to him. Among them was Narendranath Dutta, later known to the world as Swami Vivekananda. At the time, Narendra was a brilliant college student, heavily influenced by rational thought and Western philosophy. He sought definitive answers to the question of God's existence. When he heard about Ramakrishna, he came to Dakshineswar with a challenge. "Have you seen God?" Unfazed, Ramakrishna replied with utter conviction, "Yes, I see him just as I see you. In fact, I see him more clearly." That simple statement stunned Narendra, who had never before met someone who claimed such direct perception of the divine. Narendra tested Ramakrishna in many ways, sometimes mocking his ecstasies or trying to pin him down on philosophical points. Ramakrishna's childlike sincerity, however, melted his doubts over time. Gradually, Narendra recognized that behind Ramakrishna's playful exterior lay an oceanic depth of spiritual wisdom. In turn, Ramakrishna saw in Narendra the potential of a great spiritual teacher, one who could carry the message of unity, selfless service, and God-realization to the wider world. In these interactions, we see the seeds of what would eventually become the Ramakrishna Order and the Ramakrishna Mission, founded by Vivekananda and other monastic disciples after Ramakrishna's passing. But during Ramakrishna's lifetime, there was no formal organization. His life was informal and spontaneous. People came to him, he shared spiritual truths, he guided them in devotion, meditation, or self-inquiry, and he often reiterated, "As many faiths, so many paths." If asked what his ultimate teaching was, he might say, "Love of God," or "Devotion and discrimination," or "Hold to the truth." He had no single dogma, no ism to propagate, only an unwavering directness about realizing God. Yet his life was not without trials. In his later years he developed throat cancer, though at the time it was merely described as a painful condition of the throat that worsened steadily. It became difficult for him to speak, and yet visitors kept arriving to hear him teach. His disciples pleaded with him to speak less, but when he saw sincere seekers, he could not contain his enthusiasm. "Mother speaks through this mouth," he would say, ignoring the pain. As his physical condition deteriorated, it became evident to the devotees that they needed a place of respite where Ramakrishna could be cared for. They found a garden house in Kamarpukur, a quieter suburb of Calcutta, and took him there. During his final days at Kamarpukur, Ramakrishna intensified his teaching to his inner circle, ensuring that they absorbed the essence of his message. Sometimes he would gather them around his bedside, whispering instructions as best he could. He prophesied that Narendra, his beloved Naran, would one day become a spiritual luminary, guiding seekers not only in India but around the world. He also blessed each disciple, encouraging them to continue their spiritual practices, saying that God alone is the real companion in life and death. On the nights when pain racked his body, Ramakrishna would still manage a gentle smile, sometimes calling out, "Mother, Mother, I am in your hands." When people expressed sorrow at his imminent passing, he would say, "I shall live on in you all, through this work, and as the Mother wills." Toward the end, it was observed that he often went into deep samadhi, rising above physical suffering. On August 16, 1886, Ramakrishna breathed his last, surrounded by grieving yet spiritually uplifted disciples. His final word was reportedly, "Ma," Mother. Even after his passing, Ramakrishna's influence continued to spread, primarily through his disciples. Swami Vivekananda, in particular, made Ramakrishna's teachings known on an international scale, beginning with his famous address at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago in 1893, where he introduced Hindu thought and the universality of spiritual paths to a Western audience largely unfamiliar with such ideas. Over the following decades, the Ramakrishna Mission, established by Vivekananda and others, built schools, hospitals, and monastic centers, and carried forward the message of service to humanity as service to God. Theologically, Ramakrishna stands out as a mystic who personally verified the doctrines he encountered. He did not rest on second-hand knowledge. He insisted on personal experience. Historically, he emerged at a time of great ferment in Bengal, colonial rule, the rise of reform movements, and the interplay of Western rationalism with age-old Indian spiritual traditions. His life symbolized a synthesis that embraced the best of all these diverse currents, exemplifying inclusivity and tolerance without compromising the intensity of devotion. One wonders, could an alternative explanation suffice for his experiences, some combination of neurological traits, cultural conditioning, and an imaginative temperament? Such arguments have been made by certain scholars of religion and psychology. They see his trances and visions as entirely explicable by pathological or psychological factors. Yet even many of those who view him through a secular lens concede that, pathological or not, his presence and teachings have inspired profound transformations in those who encountered him. In the end, whether one regards Ramakrishna as an authentic mystic, an inspired teacher, or a psychologically unique individual, the facts remain that his life story is one of extraordinary devotion, tolerance, and direct spiritual insight. What is remarkable is the enduring freshness of his message, that all paths can lead to the same divine essence if pursued with sincerity and love. In his short lifespan of about 50 years, this simple, unlettered village boy from Kamarpukur touched the heights of spiritual experience in multiple religious traditions. He lived what others might only read or theorize about, and he did so with a spontaneous, childlike joy. His direct approach to the divine also appealed to a wide audience, from the devout priests of orthodoxy to the questioning rationalists of Calcutta's intellectual circles, from the humble villagers to the social reformers, from the devout Hindu to the curious Muslim or Christian. And in each encounter, Ramakrishna adapted his language and method, using parables or jokes, or even heartfelt tears to break down the walls that separate human beings from their own inner spirituality. In the realm of practical spirituality, Ramakrishna's example continues to resonate. A man who loved God with every fiber of his being, who saw the divine in every form and tradition, who welcomed all and judged none, who had no desire for fame or fortune, who existed only to share the joy of the divine presence he felt every moment. According to the devotees, the childlike wonder in his eyes never dimmed, even as the weight of bodily ailments bore down on him in later years. That childlike wonder was perhaps the key to his extraordinary experiences, a heart unburdened by cynicism, open to the boundless ways in which the divine can manifest. If one were to search his story for a unifying theme, it might be that sincere longing is the surest path to the realization of God. Ramakrishna himself once remarked, "Yearn for God like a lost child crying for its mother, and you will find God." His life was the embodiment of that yearning, and his entire spiritual journey, from fainting in the rice paddy fields as a boy at the sound of thunder, to glimpsing the Divine Mother in the form of Kali, to merging into the formless Brahman under Totapuri's guidance, to finding Jesus and Allah within that same ocean of consciousness, can be read as the blossoming of that initial longing. The memory of that early vision in the rice paddy fields never left him. "I saw then how the beauty of nature reveals God, how an ordinary scene can open the heart to boundless love," he once said. For him, there was never a moment when God was absent. Nature was God, Kali was God, the formless Brahman was God, and even the humans around him, rich or poor, devotee or skeptic, were in their true essence manifestations of the same infinite reality. Though it might be impossible to know precisely what he experienced in each of these divine encounters, it is very clear that for Ramakrishna himself, those experiences were as real, if not more real, than the everyday world. He left behind the conviction that spiritual truth is not a matter of intellectual agreement or doctrinal uniformity, but rather of direct perception and heartfelt devotion. He reminded those who came to him that the love between the devotee and the deity is the highest truth, a love that dissolves the sense of separation, leading to the realization that all is God. One evening, as Sen noted in his diaries, Ramakrishna turned to the small group gathered in his room and said softly, "The breeze of grace is always blowing. If you raise your sail, you will catch it." He then fell silent, gazing at the image of Kali, his lips moving in a silent prayer. The group watched him, scarcely daring to breathe. After a time, He came out of his reverie and said with a childlike smile, "Mother says we must not worry. She will take care of everything." He offered no complicated philosophy on that day, no discourses on the Upanishads or the Bible. Rather, a simple assurance that the divine is always near, like a mother watching over her children, waiting only for them to cry out in longing. For many who followed him, that was more than enough. And for many others who came later, reading about this simple priest of Dakshineswar who transcended religious boundaries with effortless ease, there is a lasting sense of wonder and inspiration. Even the skeptics might find themselves moved by the sincerity and depth of his passion, a passion that soared beyond the constraints of any single creed. As the years progressed after Ramakrishna's passing, his wife, Sarada Devi, continued to guide countless disciples and householders, offering maternal love and gentle wisdom. She told them that in Sri Ramakrishna they had witnessed the living truth of religion, and that they should make their lives an offering to the same ideal, seeing God in all, serving the poor and needy as embodiments of the divine, and seeking communion with the infinite through meditation, prayer, and selfless love. Swami Vivekananda and other direct disciples took these teachings far and wide, establishing monasteries, centers of worship, and philanthropic activities. The name of Ramakrishna became synonymous with religious harmony, the confluence of devotion and knowledge, and the ideal of seeing all beings as forms of the divine. If one visits Dakshineswar today, one can still sense the echoes of that dynamic, childlike saint pacing the courtyard, singing ecstatically or sitting quietly by the Ganges, his eyes overflowing with tears of longing or joy. The story of Sri Ramakrishna's life does not end at the boundaries of historical fact. It continues to be a living narrative in the hearts of devotees who feel his presence in their prayers and meditations. Scholars can debate the nature of his trances, psychologists can analyze the phenomena of his visions, and historians can piece together the social and cultural context of 19th century Bengal. But for those touched by his spirit, the essence is found in a heart awakened by the simple cry for God and in the profound unity that he proclaimed through direct experience. One might walk away from this story wondering which perspective to adopt. Was Ramakrishna an enlightened saint who proved the unity of all religions? Or was he a remarkable man with a unique psychological makeup that allowed him to experience powerful visions? Perhaps the question is open-ended, and that is where his power lies. He never forced a singular interpretation. To the devout, he was an avatar, a living embodiment of divine love. To the rational skeptic, he was an intriguing character worth studying for his personal magnetism and psychosomatic phenomena. And to many seekers who met him, or who meet him through his recorded teachings, he was and remains a direct doorway to the sacred, beyond labels or academic debate. In reflecting upon his legacy, it becomes clear that Ramakrishna's gift to humanity was not a new dogma, but a vivid demonstration that a boundless love for God can transcend ritual, scripture, and sect. His often quoted assertion that all religions are but paths to the one carries more weight because he personally walked those paths and found the same goal. It is a message that resonates in an era where interfaith understanding is more crucial than ever. Those early days in the rice paddy field, with a young Gadadhar transfixed by a stormy sky, may serve as a fitting metaphor for the whole of his life. He was open to the sudden descent of spiritual revelation, unafraid to be overwhelmed by the infinite, and willing to surrender himself completely to the wonder of the divine. In that surrender, he discovered the secret that sages have taught for centuries, that the divine is both immanent in every form and transcendent beyond all form, and in a final paradox, that the search for God ends only to reveal that God was there all along, at the very core of one's own being. Decades after his passing, pilgrims still flock to Dakshineswar. They walk the same courtyard where Ramakrishna sang and danced. They bow before the image of Kali that he worshipped with such fervor, and they visit the small room where he spoke words of consolation and wisdom to all who came. Many leave with the feeling that the place is charged with a profound spiritual force, as though the intense yearning of Ramakrishna's heart has left an indelible imprint on the atmosphere. One can well imagine him, in some timeless dimension, leaning forward, eyes filled with compassion, saying, "Come, my child, call on the mother with all your heart. She is waiting. She will show you everything. That invitation remains the central note of his life's symphony, a call to each person to discover their own direct connection with the divine. Historical or theological classifications cannot fully capture the richness of his legacy, but the devotion and wonder he inspired remain palpable to anyone open to the whisper of the spirit. Thus concludes the narrative of Sri Ramakrishna's life and work, not as a closed chapter, but as a living flame that continues to light the path for spiritual seekers. Whether viewed as a purely historical figure, an enlightened mystic, or an avatar of the Divine Mother, Sri Ramakrishna stands as an emblem of the power of faith, the universality of religious experience, and the eternal promise that if the heart yearns deeply enough, God will respond. And just as the thunderclouds broke open that day in the rice paddy field, revealing a vision that changed young Gadadhar forever, so too might any earnest seeker discover that the clouds of ignorance can part in an instant, unveiling the radiant truth that has always been present, beckoning us home.